James Connor sat in the dimly lit room, his fingers tapping nervously on the table. Outside, the bustling streets of Earth's capital city were alive with the usual chaos. It was a stark contrast to the moment he was about to step into. Today would change everything for him. For the past few years, Earth had been locked in an exhausting war with the Jalarie, a powerful alien race with advanced technology. No one had expected the conflict to drag on for so long. It was a war of attrition, one that Earth's diplomats had failed to end despite countless attempts. But now there was an unexpected hope. The room was cold and James' mind raced with uncertainty. He had been chosen to be part of an unprecedented diplomatic mission, one that required an unusual solution. Earth's government had negotiated a peace deal, but it wasn't the typical kind. To secure peace with the Jalarie, James was about to marry their princess. The mission was simple, at least on the surface. Marry Princess Nyxara of the Jalarie in a political ceremony, end the war, and return home as a hero. It was the perfect plan, a gesture of peace that would bind their two worlds together. What James didn't expect was how complicated it would become. James wasn't a stranger to political strategy or high-stakes negotiations, but the idea of a sham marriage felt different. He was supposed to play the role of a husband, but his heart wasn't in it. He had been instructed to act as if the marriage was real, but in truth, it was a mere formality. His only job was to appear as though Earth and the Jalarie had reconciled. As he prepared for the journey to the Jalarie capital, he couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this mission than he was being told. The diplomatic team had assured him that this was the best way to stop the war, but James couldn't help but wonder about the princess herself. What was she really like? Could he trust her? The spacecraft that was to take him to the heart of the Jalarie Empire arrived at Earth's spaceport early the next morning. The sleek, metallic ship gleamed in the sunlight, a symbol of the technological superiority of their alien counterparts. James boarded with a mix of excitement and trepidation. His life as a negotiator had prepared him for many challenges, but this one felt different. Marrying a princess to end a war was not something he had ever imagined himself doing. The journey to the Jalarie homeworld was long, and James spent most of the time in his quarters, preparing himself for the ceremony. He studied the details of the agreement, the formalities of the marriage, and the expectations placed on him. But no matter how much he read, nothing could prepare him for the reality of meeting Princess Nyxara. When they finally arrived at the Jalarie capital, the scale of the city took James' breath away. The entire planet seemed to be one giant city, its towering skyscrapers and glowing lights casting an almost surreal atmosphere. It was a place where technology and alien culture intertwined in ways he had never imagined. He was escorted to a large hall where the wedding ceremony would take place. The room was grand, decorated with exotic flowers and intricate alien designs that James didn't quite understand. He had been briefed on the customs, the traditions of the Jalarie, but none of it felt real. This was a performance, a mere formality, something to convince both sides that peace was possible. As he stood at the altar, waiting for the princess to appear, James found himself questioning his role. He had been prepared for this moment, but the reality was overwhelming. The doors opened, and there she was. Princess Nyxara walked into the room, her presence immediately commanding attention. She was taller than most humans, with striking features that seemed almost otherworldly. Her silver-blue skin shimmered under the light, and her long, flowing hair moved with a grace that seemed unnatural. Her eyes, a deep shade of violet, looked directly at James with an intensity that made him feel exposed. She wasn't what he had expected. She was not a cold, calculating princess, but someone who seemed full of life, of strength, and of purpose. The ceremony began, and as the words were spoken, James went through the motions. He exchanged vows with Nyxara, not truly believing in what he was saying, but doing it for the sake of peace. When the time came for the kiss, it was brief and formal, just as it had been rehearsed. After the ceremony, James and Nyxara were taken to a private room for the official photographs and media coverage. James couldn't help but notice how different she was now that the ceremony was over. She didn't seem like the cold princess he had expected, but more like a leader burdened with the weight of responsibility. "Are you nervous, Mr. Connor?" she asked, her voice calm yet piercing. James was taken aback by her question. He had expected her to be more aloof, but instead, she seemed genuinely interested in his feelings. "I don't think nervous is the right word," James replied, adjusting his suit. "I'm just trying to figure out what comes next." Nyxara smiled slightly, a hint of amusement in her eyes. "You'll be fine. The world is watching after all." James nodded, unsure of how to respond. The weight of the situation began to sink in. This wasn't just a political move, it was a turning point in history. Earth's fate and the fate of the Jalari now rested on the success of this marriage. The day passed in a blur of meetings, diplomatic discussions, and public appearances. James had been trained for this, but the reality of being in the Jalari capital was far more intense than he had imagined. The people watched him everywhere he went, and the pressure to maintain the illusion of a happy marriage was suffocating. As the evening came to a close, James found himself alone in his quarters, staring out of the window at the alien landscape. The city stretched for miles in every direction, the lights twinkling like stars below. He thought about his mission and what was at stake. This marriage, this Sham, was supposed to end the war. But as James thought about Nyxara, he couldn't help but wonder if there was more to her than just a political pawn. Could the bond they were forming go beyond the ceremony? Was there a chance for something real between them, or would it remain just another political gesture in the history books? James couldn't answer that question yet. But one thing was certain. The days ahead would be far more complicated than he had ever imagined. James sat in the grand hall, watching the Jalari diplomats and soldiers mingle around him. The peace deal had been signed, the war was officially over, but James felt like an outsider in this alien world. The dazzling lights of the Jalari capital city reflected in the glass walls of the hall, creating an almost dreamlike atmosphere. He glanced at Nyxara, who was speaking to a group of officials. Her long, silver-blue hair cascaded down her back like a river of starlight. She was, without a doubt, an alien princess. But as he watched her, he couldn't help but feel a strange connection to her. It had only been a few days since their wedding, and though the ceremony had been brief and formal, something had changed between them. At first, James had seen the princess as nothing more than a political figure, someone he had to tolerate for the sake of peace. But now he was starting to see her differently. She was not the distant, unapproachable leader he had expected. There was warmth behind her violet eyes, an intelligence that fascinated him. He stood up and walked over to where she was standing. As he approached, Nyxara noticed him and gave him a small nod. She excused herself from the group and walked over to him. "I see you're adjusting well to the Jalari capital," she said, her voice smooth and calm. "I'm trying," James replied, offering a faint smile. "This place is overwhelming," she laughed softly. "It is. I've lived here my whole life and I still find it overwhelming sometimes, but I suppose that's the price of power." James studied her face, noticing the tiredness in her eyes. It wasn't just the weight of the crown that made her look weary, there was something more. "I can't imagine what it's like to carry that responsibility," he said, his voice softer now. Nyxara's expression softened, and she looked away for a moment, her gaze distant. "It's not easy, but it's my duty, and I've learned to bear it." They stood in silence for a moment, the soft hum of voices and clinking glasses filling the air around them. James had always prided himself on his ability to remain composed in any situation, but being near Nyxara made him feel exposed. She wasn't just another diplomat or politician. There was something real about her, something that pulled him in. "You don't have to bear it alone," James said, his words surprising even himself. He had never intended to say that, but it felt right. Nyxara looked at him, her violet eyes searching his face. "And what exactly do you mean by that?" James took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. "You're not just a princess, you're a person, and I'm here for you if you need someone to talk to, someone to lean on." She didn't respond immediately, but her gaze softened. For a brief moment, James saw something in her eyes that was more than just political calculation. There was vulnerability there, a side of her she hadn't shown anyone before. "I appreciate your words, Mr. Connor," she said finally, her voice steady again. "But I have my duties." "There is no time for anything else." James nodded, though he didn't entirely believe her. There was something more beneath the surface. He had seen it in her when she had spoken during the ceremony, in the way her voice had trembled ever so slightly. Over the next few days, their interactions became more frequent. James found himself spending time with Nyxara, not just for official duties, but for simple conversation. They would walk through the grand halls of the palace, talking about anything and everything. Sometimes they spoke about Earth's history, other times about Jalari culture. But more often than not, their conversations turned personal. Nyxara began to open up more, revealing her struggles with the pressure of ruling an empire. She spoke of her family, her fear of failure, and the burden of carrying the hopes of an entire people. James listened quietly, offering his support where he could. But what struck him the most was how deeply she cared about her people. Despite her royal status, despite her power, Nyxara was just a person trying to do the right thing in a world full of challenges. One evening, after a particularly long day of meetings, Nyxara invited James to dinner. The two of them sat at a long table, surrounded by dishes from both Earth and the Jalari Empire. The food was strange to James, unfamiliar in texture and taste, but Nyxara insisted that he try it. "You don't have to like it," she said with a smile, "but you do have to try it." They ate in silence for a while, and James couldn't help but feel a sense of comfort in the quiet. Despite everything, despite the war that had brought them together and the political game they were playing, there was something peaceful about this moment. When they were finished, Nyxara leaned back in her chair and let out a deep sigh. "I wish things were simpler," she said softly. "I wish I could just be normal." "Normal," James echoed. "What does that mean for you?" "Not having to worry about the fate of my people every second of the day, not having to make choices that could destroy lives. I long for a simpler life, one where I don't have to wear this crown every day." James studied her face, noting the sadness in her eyes. He knew that this wasn't just about the crown. It was about the weight of responsibility she carried, a weight that no one could truly understand unless they had lived her life. "You don't have to carry it alone," James said again, his voice low. "I'm here. For as long as you need me." Nyxara met his gaze, her eyes searching his face for a moment before she spoke. "Thank you, Mr. Connor. I don't know what I would do without you." James didn't know what to say. The tension between them was undeniable now, more than just the political game they were playing. There was something real between them, something neither of them had expected. As the days passed, the lines between their professional relationship and personal connection became more blurred. James found himself spending more time with Nyxara, not because he had to, but because he wanted to. He had never imagined that a diplomatic mission could lead to something so complicated, but complications didn't stop there. The peaceful facade that had been built over the last few days began to crack. Whispers of rebellion began to spread through the palace. There were factions within the Jalari who resented the peace deal, who saw the marriage as a betrayal of their people. The cracks in the alliance began to show, and with them came the real danger that peace could still slip away. One evening, as James and Nyxara sat together in a private chamber discussing the latest political developments, the door burst open. A Jalari officer entered, his face grave. "Your Highness," the officer said, bowing deeply, "there are reports of unrest among the people. Some factions are plotting against the peace treaty." Nyxara's face hardened, her expression unreadable. James could feel the tension rise in the room as the officer's words sank in. The peaceful illusion was shattered. "What are we going to do?" James asked quietly, his gaze locked on Nyxara's face. Nyxara stood, her posture rigid. "We fight. We do what we must to protect our people and the peace we've worked so hard for." James stood as well, his heart racing. He had never imagined that their marriage would lead to this. But now, it was no longer just a political game. It was about survival, about protecting the future of both their worlds. As Nyxara turned to face him, there was a new determination in her eyes, a fire that James had not seen before. It was the same fire that had made her a princess, a leader, and now, perhaps, something more. And as the tension in the room mounted, James realized that his life had changed forever. This wasn't just about peace anymore, it was about something deeper, something more personal. "I'll stand by you," he said, his voice steady, "no matter what happens." Nyxara nodded, her expression softening just for a moment. "Thank you, James. I don't know where this journey will take us, but I'm glad you're with me." And as the shadows of rebellion loomed on the horizon, James knew that the bond between him and Nyxara had only just begun to grow stronger. James Connor sat in the dimly lit war room, staring at the holographic map before him. The peaceful dream they had been working so hard to build was crumbling before their eyes. Reports were coming in from all over the Jalari Empire, each one more alarming than the last. Factions were rising up, angry at the peace treaty, angry at the idea of a human marrying their princess. What had begun as a simple diplomatic mission had now become a desperate fight for survival. James looked up as Nyxara entered the room. Her face was drawn, her eyes tired, but there was still a fire in her that James had come to respect. She had faced the pressures of leadership her whole life, and yet she was still standing strong. But this time, even she couldn't hide the weight of what was happening. "The situation is worse than we thought," James said, his voice heavy. "The rebellion is spreading fast. There are rumors of a full-scale attack on the capital." Nyxara nodded, her fingers clenched into fists at her sides. "I know. My advisors tell me that if we don't act soon, the rebellion will take control. But if we fight back too hard, we risk losing everything we've worked for. The peace, the alliance with Earth, it could all be destroyed." James understood the delicate balance she was walking. On the one hand, the Jalerie were powerful, and their military could easily crush any rebellion. But on the other hand, if they used force, it would only fuel the anger of the people and make peace an even harder goal to achieve. "We don't have a choice," he said quietly. "We need to act before it's too late." Nyxara looked at him for a moment, her gaze searching his face. It was as though she were trying to gauge his loyalty, his willingness to fight for her and for the future of their two worlds. James could feel the tension between them, but there was something else there too. In the middle of all the chaos, they had found something real in each other, something that went beyond politics, beyond duty. "We'll do whatever it takes to stop this rebellion," Nyxara said firmly. "But we must be careful. We cannot lose the trust of the people. If we do, everything will have been for nothing." James nodded, knowing she was right. They had to handle this with precision. But as he looked at her, he also knew that their bond had become stronger than either of them had anticipated. The pressure they were under had drawn them closer, and now, in this moment of uncertainty, they needed each other more than ever. Later that night, James and Nyxara stood together on the balcony of the palace, looking out at the sprawling city below. The lights of the Jalerie capital twinkled in the distance, casting a soft glow on the sleek alien buildings. It was a beautiful sight, but James could see the cracks beneath the surface. The tension in the air was palpable, and he knew that it wouldn't be long before the situation exploded. "James," Nyxara said, her voice soft, almost hesitant. "I know this marriage was supposed to be a political move, but I need you to know I never expected this." James turned to her, his heart suddenly racing. He had never seen her look so vulnerable. The weight of the rebellion, the pressure of her people's expectations, it was all taking its toll on her. And yet she was still standing strong, still determined to fight for peace. He couldn't help but admire her for it. "I never expected it either," he said honestly. "But I'm glad it's you. I'm glad it's us." Nyxara looked at him, her violet eyes searching his face. "Do you really think we can make this work? Do you think we can bring peace to two worlds that have been at war for so long?" James hesitated, the weight of her question settling on his shoulders. Could they really make this work? Could he and Nyxara, two people from completely different worlds, truly find a way to bridge the gap between their civilizations? The answer wasn't clear, but one thing was certain. He wasn't going to give up on her. He wasn't going to give up on them. "I believe we can," he said firmly. "I believe in you, Nyxara, and I believe in the peace we can create together." For a moment they stood in silence, the weight of the world pressing down on them. But in that silence there was a shared understanding, a shared resolve. They weren't just fighting for peace anymore. They were fighting for each other, for a future that was uncertain but worth pursuing. The next day, the rebellion erupted in full force. Armed soldiers, led by the rogue factions within the Jalerie, stormed the palace gates. The news spread quickly. The princess and her human husband were under attack. James and Nyxara had no choice but to act fast. They moved quickly, with the Jalerie military and their loyalists working together to fortify the palace. The attack came from all directions, and within hours the palace was surrounded. James found himself in the thick of the fighting, side by side with Nyxara. Though they were outnumbered, the loyalty of their supporters gave them an edge. As they moved through the palace corridors, James could see the determination in Nyxara's eyes. She wasn't just a princess anymore. She was a leader fighting for her people, for the future of her world, and James couldn't help but admire her even more. Despite the chaos around them, she remained calm, making decisions with precision and clarity. "We have to take control of the communications center," she said, her voice steady. If we can broadcast a message to the people, we can show them that we're in control. We can show them that we won't back down. James nodded, his hand resting on the weapon at his side. Let's move. They fought their way through the palace, each step taking them closer to the heart of the rebellion. James had fought in many dangerous situations before, but nothing had felt quite like this. He wasn't just fighting for survival, he was fighting for something more. He was fighting for Nyxara, for the peace they had both worked so hard to build. When they finally reached the communications center, Nyxara took her place in front of the console, her fingers flying over the controls. James stood by her side, watching as she prepared to address the people. Attention, Jalari people, Nyxara's voice rang out through the palace speakers, strong and unwavering. We are under attack, but we will not be cowed, we will not be broken. The peace we've worked for is not a lie. I, Princess Nyxara, and my husband, James Connor, will fight to protect it. This rebellion will not destroy our future. We stand united. We stand strong. Her words rang out across the capital, and for a moment the palace seemed to hold its breath. Then, as if on cue, a wave of support poured in from the people. Soldiers loyal to Nyxara rallied, and the tide of the battle began to shift. But the rebellion was not over. The rogue factions had deep roots in the Jalari Empire, and they weren't going to give up easily. As James and Nyxara prepared for the next phase of the battle, James realized that the stakes had never been higher. This wasn't just about a marriage anymore. It was about the survival of their people, the future of their worlds. And no matter what, he knew he would stand by Nyxara's side. They had come too far to let it all slip away now. The sound of blaster fire echoed through the palace halls. The battle was far from over, but for James, Connor, and Princess Nyxara, it had become more than just a fight for survival. It was a fight for their future, for the peace they had both dreamed of. They moved through the corridors of the palace, their every step a reminder of how far they had come and how much was at stake. James had never imagined that his diplomatic mission would lead to this, leading a resistance against a rebellion in a foreign world. But as he glanced at Nyxara, her determined gaze locked on the path ahead, he realized that this wasn't just about politics anymore. It was about the lives they had touched, the future they could build together, and the love that had quietly blossomed between them despite the odds. They reached the palace's main courtyard, where the bulk of the fighting was concentrated. The Jalari soldiers were holding their ground, but the rebel forces were relentless. James and Nyxara had joined forces with the royal army, but they knew that victory wasn't guaranteed. The rebels had deep support among the Jalari people, and their hatred for the peace treaty was only growing. Nyxara turned to James, her voice low but firm. We need to end this now. We can't let this rebellion drag on any longer. If we don't act decisively, we risk losing everything we've worked for. James nodded, his heart pounding in his chest. What's the plan? We'll take the command center, she said. If we can control the communications, we can send a message to the rebels and the people. We'll show them that we're in control. We'll show them that the peace isn't just a dream. They moved quickly, their footsteps swift but deliberate. The palace had been designed for grandeur, but now it was a maze of corridors and rooms that seemed endless, each corner hiding more danger. The chaos of battle was all around them. Blaster fire streaked across the air, and the sound of shouting soldiers filled the space. But despite the noise, James couldn't help but focus on Nyxara. She moved with such grace, with such purpose, that it was hard not to feel inspired by her. She wasn't just a princess, she was a leader. When they finally reached the command center, the doors burst open. Inside, a group of rebel soldiers was gathered around a control panel, their weapons raised. They turned to face James and Nyxara, eyes wide with surprise. This is it, James whispered, his hand on the blaster at his side. Stay close, Nyxara nodded, her eyes narrowing. Don't fire unless we have to. They charged forward together, and the room erupted into chaos. The rebel soldiers reacted quickly, their blasters firing in quick succession. James ducked behind a console, taking cover as the bolts of energy flew past him. Nyxara was beside him in an instant, her movements swift and precise. Give up, James shouted, his voice steady despite the danger. The battle is lost. You're only destroying your own future. The rebel soldiers hesitated, and for a moment the room grew silent. James could see the doubt in their eyes, but it was Nyxara's voice that carried the weight of authority. Enough, she cried. This rebellion ends today. The peace I've worked for, the peace that we all need, will not be destroyed by hatred and fear. You can either join us in rebuilding or you can continue to fight in vain. The choice is yours." The room was still for a moment longer, and then the rebels slowly lowered their weapons. One by one, they dropped to their knees, their heads bowed in surrender. James stood up, his breath coming in short gasps. He glanced at Nyxara, her eyes filled with a mix of relief and exhaustion. They had won for now, but he knew that the real work was just beginning. "We need to broadcast the message," Nyxara said, her voice calm now. "The people need to hear the truth." They moved quickly to the control panel, and Nyxara took her place in front of it. The room fell silent as she prepared to address the Jalari people, her fingers hovering over the keys. James stood beside her, watching as she composed herself. "This is Princess Nyxara," she began, her voice strong and clear. "To the people of the Jalari and to all those who hear this message, the time for rebellion is over. The peace that we have worked for is not just a dream, it is our future. I know that many of you feel betrayed, that the alliance with Earth is a threat to our way of life. But I promise you, we are not giving up on who we are. We are not giving up on the Jalari people. Together we can build a future that is stronger, better, and more united than ever before." She paused, her gaze meeting James for just a moment. He could see the weight of her words, the conviction in her eyes. "The choice is ours," she continued. "We can rebuild. We can move forward together, but we cannot do it if we allow fear and hatred to control us. We must rise above this and choose peace, for the future of our people and for the future of the galaxy." As her voice rang out across the airwaves, James could feel the tension in the room shift. The rebels who had once fought so fiercely for their cause now stood quietly, listening. And in that moment, something changed in the air. The power of Nyxara's words, the honesty in her voice, reached deeper than any weapon ever could. When the transmission ended, silence hung in the room. James turned to Nyxara, his heart swelling with pride. She had done it. She had brought the rebellion to its knees without firing a single shot. "We did it," he said, his voice filled with awe. Nyxara turned to face him, a weary but satisfied smile on her face. "We did." But even as the words left her mouth, James could see that the battle was far from over. There was still work to be done, still resistance to face. The political landscape would never be the same, and the road to lasting peace would be long and difficult. But James was no longer afraid. He had seen the strength in Nyxara, in her people, and in their shared vision for the future. And he knew that together they could face whatever came next. Later that night, as the stars shone brightly above the palace, James and Nyxara stood together on the balcony once more. The world was still in turmoil, but they had changed the course of history. And as they looked out at the city, James realized that this was just the beginning. He had come to this world as a diplomat, a man tasked with securing peace. But now he was something more. He was a partner, a protector, and a leader in his own right. And as Nyxara took his hand, he knew that whatever came next, they would face it together. The rebellion was over, but their journey was just beginning. The future was uncertain, but it was theirs to build, together.